"Stop the wedding!" Lorenzo De Luca's voice thundered through the centuries-old church just as the minister opened his mouth to begin the vows. The massive oak doors exploded inward. Dozens of impeccably dressed men in black suits stormed inside with military precision, their movement so synchronized that every guest instinctively froze. Hidden firearms flashed beneath tailored jackets. Several security guards reached for their own weapons, convinced they were seconds away from witnessing a massacre. Mothers shielded their children. The groom stepped protectively in front of the bride. No one dared breathe. Everyone knew exactly who had entered. Lorenzo De Luca, the most feared mafia boss in America. A man whose name appeared only in whispers, whose empire stretched across ports, casinos, luxury hotels, shipping lines, and fortunes worth billions. Politicians sought his favor. Criminals feared his judgment. Entire organizations changed their plans when they heard he was coming. Yet Lorenzo ignored every terrified face in the church. He wasn't looking at the groom. He wasn't looking at the minister. He wasn't looking at the armed guards now surrounding him. His eyes never left the bride. Sophie Walker, the quiet, plus-size librarian, standing in a simple white wedding dress. Tears shimmered in Lorenzo's eyes, something none of his capos had ever witnessed in decades of loyal service. Slowly, almost as if afraid she might disappear, he walked toward her. The entire church held its breath. When he finally stopped only a few feet away, his voice broke into a whisper that somehow echoed louder than his earlier command. "After waiting for me all these years." He swallowed painfully. "Why are you marrying someone else?" 25 years earlier, long before newspapers called Lorenzo De Luca the most dangerous man in America, he had simply been a frightened little boy. At 13 years old, Lorenzo already understood that kindness was a luxury few people could afford. His father had been murdered in broad daylight outside a neighborhood grocery store. The adults never explained why. They simply lowered their voices whenever the De Luca family was mentioned. Curtains closed as Lorenzo walked down the street. Parents pulled their children inside. Shopkeepers suddenly became too busy to notice the lonely boy wandering past their windows. Fear spread faster than truth. To everyone else, Lorenzo carried his father's shadow. No one cared that he was just a child, except one girl. Every afternoon, Sophie Walker noticed him sitting alone behind the old public library with an unread book resting on his knees. He never turned the pages. He simply stared into the distance, as if waiting for someone who would never return. Sophie was only 7 years old, but she possessed the rare ability to see people instead of reputations. The first time she approached him, Lorenzo barely looked up. "Aren't you scared of me?" he asked quietly. Sophie tilted her head in confusion. "Should I be? My dad was—" He couldn't finish the sentence. She sat beside him anyway. "My mum says hungry people are grumpy." Without another word, she opened her lunchbox and placed half of her sandwich into his hands. Lorenzo stared at it for several seconds. No one had offered him anything since his father's funeral. Not food, not friendship, not even a smile. His fingers trembled as he accepted the sandwich. It tasted like ordinary peanut butter. Yet years later, after extravagant dinners with presidents, billionaires, and kings, Lorenzo would still remember it as the finest meal of his life. From that day forward, Sophie appeared almost every afternoon. Sometimes she brought cookies, sometimes comic books, sometimes she simply talked while Lorenzo listened. She never asked about his father's death. She never cared about the rumors. To her, he was simply the lonely boy who needed someone to sit beside him. Weeks became months. Seasons changed. Their unlikely friendship became the only peaceful part of Lorenzo's childhood. One rainy afternoon, Sophie carefully tied a colorful friendship bracelet around his wrist. "I made it myself," she said proudly. The uneven threads revealed tiny mistakes only a child could make. "If you ever leave," she hesitated, "promise you'll come back." Lorenzo looked at the bracelet as though it were made of gold. "I promise." He raised his little finger. "When I'm strong enough, I'll repay every kindness you've ever shown me." Sophie laughed. "You don't owe me anything." "I do." His answer came without hesitation. "You treated me like I mattered." Neither child realized that promises made before life changes forever are often the ones that shape destiny the most. Only a week later, black SUVs arrived before sunrise. Powerful men in expensive suits surrounded Lorenzo. His father's oldest allies had come. A bloody war inside the criminal underworld had begun, and keeping the last DeLuca heir in the neighborhood had become impossible. Lorenzo searched desperately for Sophie before leaving. She was visiting relatives across town. There was no time to wait. As the convoy pulled away, Lorenzo pressed his hand against the window, silently repeating the promise he never had the chance to say goodbye with. "I'll come back, I swear it." Behind him, the friendship bracelet remained tightly wrapped around his wrist. Years passed. The little boy disappeared. In his place rose a man whose name inspired both loyalty and terror. Lorenzo DeLuca built an empire through intelligence, ruthless discipline, and impossible sacrifices. Every victory demanded another piece of the gentle child he had once been. Yet one memory refused to fade. A little girl sharing half a sandwich behind an old library. 25 years later, Sophie Walker had become the kind of person people appreciated without ever truly noticing. Every morning before sunrise, she unlocked the doors of the small public library, nestled between an aging bakery and a modest flower shop. By the time children hurried in after school, she already knew which books each of them would ask for. She remembered birthdays, favorite authors, reading levels, the quiet struggles hidden behind shy smiles. To the children, Miss Sophie wasn't simply a librarian. She was the safest place in the neighborhood. She organized reading clubs with almost no budget, repaired torn books with astonishing patience, and often bought new novels with her own paycheck whenever the library couldn't afford them. Parents adored her. Teachers admired her, yet admiration rarely became attention. Most people described Sophie with the same polite sentence, "She's such a nice woman." It was the kind of compliment that quietly erased everything extraordinary about her. At 32, Sophie had grown accustomed to being overlooked. Her intelligence impressed employers. Her kindness comforted strangers. But when conversations turned toward romance, people seemed to notice only one thing: her size. Years earlier, Nathan Pierce had convinced her that love required changing who she was. Successful, confident, handsome, Nathan had entered her life like a dream, carefully designed to come true. A rising attorney from one of the city's most prestigious firms, he possessed effortless charm and impeccable manners. During their first months together, he constantly praised Sophie's warmth and intelligence. "You make me feel peaceful," he once told her. She believed him. For the first time, someone seemed to see beyond appearances, or so she thought. The comments began gradually. "You'd look amazing if you lost just a little weight." "We should skip dessert tonight." "My colleagues can be judgmental. They'll understand once they get to know you." Every sentence sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they slowly dismantled her confidence. Sophie tried every diet. Morning runs before work. Late-night gym sessions. Calorie counting. She wasn't chasing beauty. She was chasing acceptance.
No matter how much she changed, Nathan always found another flaw. Then one evening, after arriving early for dinner at an expensive restaurant, Sophie overheard a conversation she was never meant to hear. Nathan sat with two co-workers near the bar. One laughed. "So, when are you finally dumping the librarian?" Nathan chuckled. "I've already met someone better." "What about Sophie?" He shrugged. "She's sweet. But let's be honest. A guy with my career can't build the image I want beside someone like." He lowered his voice. "Her." The words struck harder than any insult shouted directly to her face. Image. Not love. Not partnership. Not loyalty. Image. Sophie quietly left before he ever realized she had arrived. 3 weeks later, Nathan announced his engagement to a glamorous fitness influencer, whose photographs dominated social media. The newspapers celebrated them as the city's newest power couple. Sophie simply returned to work. She never spoke badly about Nathan. She never sought revenge. She buried the pain beneath routine. The children still needed stories. Books still needed repairing. Life moved forward. At least on the outside. What Sophie never knew was that someone had witnessed every heartbreaking moment from much farther away. High above Manhattan, inside the glass walls of the DeLuca headquarters, Lorenzo stood silently before an enormous window overlooking the city skyline. One of his capos entered carefully. The attorney. Lorenzo didn't turn around. "I know. He left her." "Yes." The capo hesitated. "Should we?" "No." The answer came instantly. "No one touches him." The room fell silent. Every man present understood what that restraint cost their boss. Lorenzo possessed enough influence to erase Nathan's entire career before sunset. A single phone call could destroy businesses. Another could freeze bank accounts. A third could make powerful people disappear from public life forever. Yet he refused, because Sophie deserved a life untouched by his darkness. Instead, Lorenzo chose a different path. Invisible protection. When Sophie's mother required emergency surgery that insurance refused to cover, an anonymous charitable foundation quietly paid every bill before the hospital demanded a single dollar. When local developers attempted to purchase the neighborhood library for demolition, mysterious investors acquired the surrounding properties overnight, making the project financially impossible. When crime briefly increased near Sophie's apartment building, additional police funding somehow appeared within weeks. No one questioned where the money came from. No one traced the impossible coincidences back to Lorenzo DeLuca. That was exactly how he wanted it. Every year, he received updated reports. Not surveillance born from obsession, protection born from gratitude. His advisors often questioned the expense. "Boss, why risk resources on someone who doesn't even know?" Lorenzo answered the same way every time. Because she once fed a hungry boy. His capos never argued again. Still, protection was not presence. Money could not replace companionship. Safety could not erase loneliness. And while Lorenzo convinced himself distance was an act of love, Sophie interpreted silence as abandonment. The promise behind the library. The little friendship bracelet. The boy who swore he would return. Year after year, those memories faded into something that felt increasingly childish. Eventually, she stopped wondering, stopped hoping, stopped expecting impossible miracles. Then, on a rainy autumn evening, after another exhausting day at the library, someone unexpected appeared at her door. Nathan Pierce, holding flowers, wearing the same confident smile she had once mistaken for sincerity. "I'm different now," he said softly. "I made the biggest mistake of my life." Sophie stared at him in stunned silence. She had no idea that his return had nothing to do with regret, and everything to do with the name. Lorenzo DeLuca, Nathan Pierce had rehearsed the performance carefully. The flowers were expensive. His tailored navy suit projected quiet confidence. Even the expression on his face had been practiced in the mirror, a mixture of regret, humility, and hope. To anyone watching, he appeared to be a man fighting for the woman he had foolishly lost. Only Nathan knew the truth. He wasn't chasing Sophie. He was chasing his own pride. 3 nights earlier, he had attended an exclusive charity gala where the city's wealthiest executives mingled beneath crystal chandeliers. During a private conversation, he overheard 2 investment bankers whispering about an unexpected subject. The DeLuca Foundation keeps funding projects around Westbridge. I heard it's because someone important lives there. Nathan barely reacted, until one of them mentioned a familiar name, Sophie Walker. His heart skipped. That couldn't be right. Curiosity quickly turned into obsession. Within days, Nathan used every legal connection available to uncover what ordinary people never noticed. Anonymous donations. Medical bills paid in full. Neighborhood redevelopment quietly halted. Security improvements funded through shell charities. None of the paperwork carried Lorenzo DeLuca's name, but Nathan had spent years tracing hidden financial structures. The pattern was unmistakable. Someone, unimaginably powerful, had been protecting Sophie for years. Only one man possessed both the resources and the influence to accomplish it. Lorenzo DeLuca. Nathan laughed at first. It sounded ridiculous. America's most feared mafia boss, interested in the quiet librarian he had once discarded. Impossible. Yet the deeper he investigated, the more obvious the truth became. The protection never benefited anyone else, only Sophie. His confidence slowly transformed into panic. If Lorenzo truly cared about her, Nathan had made the biggest mistake of his life. Not because he loved Sophie, but because he had underestimated her value. The realization poisoned his thoughts. He couldn't accept that the woman he once considered an embarrassment had become important to the most powerful man in America. His ego refused to allow it. So he devised another plan. Win Sophie back before Lorenzo ever appeared. Not out of affection, out of victory. Over the following weeks, Nathan became everything he had never been during their relationship. He apologized. He listened. He remembered small details. He volunteered at literacy events where Sophie organized children's reading programs. He donated thousands of dollars to the library. Everyone around Sophie noticed the change. People can grow, one coworker whispered. Maybe he finally understands what he lost. Sophie wanted to believe that. Not because she still loved Nathan, because she desperately wanted to believe people could become better. She accepted his apologies cautiously. Then came the proposal. It happened during the library's annual fundraising dinner. Nathan knelt before dozens of surprised guests. He spoke with remarkable sincerity. I spent years chasing success. But success means nothing if you have no one worth sharing it with. I'm asking for one more chance. Tears appeared in several audience members. The children clapped excitedly. Every eye turned towards Sophie. Inside, her heart remained strangely quiet. She searched herself for the overwhelming joy every bride-to-be was supposed to feel. It wasn't there. Only peace. Or perhaps surrender. Nathan wasn't the great love of her life. He was simply the future that made the most sense. A stable home, respectable marriage, someone who finally claimed to appreciate her. Maybe love didn't always arrive with fireworks. Maybe adulthood meant choosing certainty over impossible dreams. After a long silence, she whispered one word. Yes. The room erupted into applause. Nathan embraced her tightly, smiling for every camera. No one noticed that Sophie quietly closed her eyes instead of smiling back. Across the country, in a private conference room overlooking the port of Los Angeles, Lorenzo DeLuca was negotiating a billion-dollar international shipping agreement. Representatives from Europe, Asia, and South America waited as legal teams finalized documents that had taken nearly 18 months to prepare. Nothing interrupted Lorenzo during negotiations. Nothing, until his chief of security entered without knocking. Every executive in the room immediately fell silent. The interruption alone signaled disaster. The man leaned close. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "Boss." He handed Lorenzo a small envelope. "Personal." Lorenzo frowned. Only 4 people in the world possessed authorization to interrupt meetings of this magnitude. He opened the envelope. Inside lay a cream-colored invitation. Elegant, simple. Wedding invitation. Nathan Pierce and Sophie Walker. For a moment, time stopped. The conference room disappeared. The contracts, the executives, the billions of dollars. Everything dissolved into silence. His eyes remained fixed on 2 names printed beside one another. Sophie Walker, marrying someone else. One of the foreign investors finally cleared his throat. "Mr. DeLuca." No response. Lorenzo continued staring at the invitation. His normally steady hands trembled almost imperceptibly. His oldest capo had served beside him for over 20 years. He had watched Lorenzo survive assassination attempts, betrayals, prison, wars. He had never, not once, seen fear in Lorenzo's eyes. Until now. Without another word, Lorenzo slowly stood. "We're finished." One executive looked confused. "But the agreement, it can wait. Sir, this deal affects. It can wait." His calm voice carried an unfamiliar weight. Within seconds he had left the room. No explanation, no negotiation, nothing. Outside, his senior capos hurried after him. "Boss! Should we postpone tomorrow's meeting in Chicago? Cancel it. The Senate committee? Cancel it. The European delegation? Everything." The men exchanged bewildered glances. Entire governments rearranged schedules for Lorenzo DeLuca. He had never cancelled anything. He stopped walking only once. Looking toward the distant skyline, he spoke so quietly that only the closest capo could hear. "I promised her." The words caught painfully in his throat. "I'd come back." For the first time in decades, Lorenzo DeLuca realized that power could buy almost anything, except time already lost. The wedding was only 4 days away. For everyone else, that meant final dress fittings, floral arrangements, seating charts, and rehearsals. For Lorenzo DeLuca, it became the longest 4 days of his life. He ordered every unnecessary meeting cancelled. His advisors were stunned. Entire divisions of the DeLuca empire slowed for the first time in decades. No one dared question why. Only his oldest capos understood something had changed. Not in the empire. In the man who ruled it. Late that evening, Lorenzo entered the private vault beneath his Manhattan residence. The room contained items no outsider would ever expect a mafia boss to keep. Ancient family photographs, a worn leather journal, his father's old pocket watch, a faded baseball, and inside a small wooden box, a friendship bracelet. The colorful threads had long since lost their brightness. One knot had nearly unraveled. Time had weathered every strand, yet Lorenzo had preserved it through assassinations, prison cells, border crossings, gunfights, and decades of violence. He lifted it with both hands, as carefully as someone holding a priceless relic. His chief advisor quietly entered the room. "I've never seen you come down here, boss." Lorenzo smiled faintly. "This is where I keep everything that reminds me who I was before people feared me." His advisor looked at the bracelet. "She made that? When she was 7, and you've carried it. Every day." The older man remained silent. He suddenly understood why no woman had ever truly entered Lorenzo's heart. There had never been room, Not while one childhood promise continued beating beneath decades of carefully controlled emotion. Across town, Sophie sat alone inside the church after the wedding rehearsal. The stained glass windows painted soft colors across the empty pews. The silence should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt unbearably heavy. She looked toward the altar, where she would soon promise the rest of her life to Nathan. Nothing inside her celebrated. Nothing inside her resisted. She simply felt tired. Tired already. The familiar voice startled her. Father Michael smiled gently as he approached. "I've officiated weddings for 30 years. I've learned to recognize different kinds of brides." Sophie forced a smile. "I'm just nervous." "No." He sat beside her. Nervous brides sparkle. "You look like someone attending a goodbye." Her composure cracked. Not dramatically, not with sobbing, just one quiet tear. Then another. "I kept waiting for someone." She whispered the words almost to herself. "For years." Father Michael didn't interrupt. "I told myself it was childish, so I stopped hoping." She laughed softly through her tears. "Maybe growing up just means accepting that some promises belong to children." The priest gently folded his hands. "Or perhaps it means discovering why they were delayed." Before Sophie could answer, Nathan appeared at the far end of the church. His expression immediately changed when he noticed the tears. Concern crossed his face. At least, it appeared to. "Everything okay?" Father Michael quietly excused himself. Nathan sat beside Sophie. "You've been distant." She looked down. "I'm scared." "About tomorrow?" She nodded. He took her hand. "Sophie, there are things you need to understand." His tone shifted. Gentle. Calculated. "I know you've wondered about Lorenzo De Luca." Her breathing stopped. Nathan noticed immediately. "So, you still remember him?" "I remember my childhood." Nathan smiled sympathetically. "I investigated. He came back years ago." Sophie's heart skipped. "He did?" Nathan sighed dramatically. "Yes, he knew exactly where you lived." The words landed like ice. "He never contacted you?" "No." "He never wrote?" "No." "He never called?" Silence. Nathan leaned closer. "I think you deserve the truth. He built an empire. He became one of the richest and most powerful men alive. He could have returned any day, but he didn't." Sophie's fingers slowly tightened. Nathan delivered the final blow with perfect precision. "Because even Lorenzo De Luca understood something." "What?" Nathan looked directly into her eyes. "A man like him would never truly choose someone like you." The church suddenly felt colder. Sophie didn't answer. Nathan continued. "He remembers you fondly." "I'm sure he does. But memories aren't love. Powerful men marry women who fit beside them. Models. Socialites. Women the world admires." He squeezed her hand. "I choose you. I always should have. You deserve someone who isn't ashamed to stand beside you." Every insecurity Sophie had spent years burying rose to the surface at once. She remembered the mirrors, the diets, the whispers, the photographs she always avoided, the invitations that never came. Maybe Nathan was right. Maybe Lorenzo had remembered. But remembering wasn't enough. If he had truly wanted her, he would have come. Instead, he had remained silent for 25 years. The silence became its own answer. She slowly removed the tiny ribbon tied around her wrist. Inside the ribbon rested a faded childhood photograph. 2 children sitting behind an old library, one sharing half a sandwich, the other smiling for what might have been the first time in months. She looked at it one final time, then carefully folded it, placed it back into her purse, and closed the clasp. Some stories deserved beautiful endings. Others simply deserved acceptance. The following morning, church bells echoed across the neighborhood. Guests filled every pew. White roses lined the aisle. A string quartet played softly beneath the vaulted ceiling. Nathan waited confidently at the altar. Outside, a black convoy raced through the city. Luxury sedans ignored every traffic signal. Motorcycle escorts cleared intersections. Inside the lead vehicle, Lorenzo De Luca held a small friendship bracelet in one hand. For the first time since becoming boss, he was praying. Not for power, not for victory, not even for love, only, "Please don't let me be too late." The church doors came into view. The convoy accelerated. Inside, Father Michael smiled warmly at the couple. Dearly beloved. The massive wooden doors exploded open.
The sound of splintering wood echoed through the sanctuary. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. The massive oak doors swung inward as dozens of impeccably dressed capos entered with disciplined precision, spreading through the church without uttering a single word. Their presence was commanding, yet none drew a weapon. None threatened a guest. They simply formed a silent path. Then Lorenzo De Luca walked through it. The room seemed to shrink around him. Some guests instinctively stepped backward. Others lowered their eyes. Several recognized him immediately from newspaper photographs and whispered his name in disbelief. The boss! The De Luca! My God! Nathan felt his stomach tighten. He had expected Lorenzo to remain a distant rumor. He had never imagined facing him. Father Michael lowered the ceremony book and quietly stepped aside. No one dared interrupt. Lorenzo ignored every terrified face surrounding him. His entire world narrowed to one woman standing at the altar. Sophie. She looked exactly as he remembered, only older, stronger, kinder somehow. For one painful second, neither of them moved. Then Lorenzo began walking. Each step echoed through the silent church. When he finally stopped before her, he didn't speak. Instead, he slowly opened his hand. Resting on his palm lay a faded friendship bracelet. The colorful threads had almost disappeared beneath time. Several knots had loosened. One corner was stained dark from old blood. Sophie's breath caught. "No," she whispered. "It can't be." Lorenzo's voice trembled. "You tied this around my wrist. When you were 7. He looked down at the bracelet. "I promised I'd never take it off." His eyes filled with tears. "I never did." The church remained completely silent. Even the children stopped moving. Lorenzo carefully placed the bracelet into Sophie's trembling hands. "I carried it through every war, every prison, every country, every bullet meant for me. I carried it because it reminded me that before the world taught me fear, someone taught me kindness." A tear rolled down Sophie's cheek. "You came back," she whispered. "I came back far too late." For the first time in decades, the most feared mafia boss in America looked utterly broken. He slowly lowered himself onto one knee. A collective gasp swept through the church. Several capos instinctively looked away. None of them had ever seen Lorenzo kneel before anyone. Not politicians, not billionaires, not rival bosses. No one. Nathan stared in disbelief. This wasn't possible. Power bowed to no one. Yet here it was. The most powerful man in the room, kneeling before the woman Nathan had once considered unworthy. Lorenzo lowered his head. "I'm not here to stop your happiness. I'm here because I owe you the apology you've waited 25 years to hear." His voice cracked. "When I left, I believed staying away would keep you safe. I convinced myself distance was love. So I watched over you without ever letting you see me. I paid hospital bills. I protected your neighborhood. I kept danger away. But I never gave you the one thing you deserved. My presence." He finally looked into her eyes. "I'm late. So unbearably late. But I have loved you since before anyone called me boss." Silence. Not the silence of fear, the silence of hundreds of people witnessing absolute truth. Nathan suddenly stepped forward. "This is manipulation." His voice sounded strangely small. "You disappear for decades, and now you expect—" Lorenzo didn't even look at him. Instead, he addressed the entire church. "You judged her because of what you could see." He slowly stood. "I judged her because of something none of you ever witnessed." He turned toward the guests. "When I was 13, my father had just been murdered. People crossed the street rather than walk beside me. They looked at me and saw danger. I hadn't eaten all day." He smiled through tears. "A little girl sat beside me. She shared half of her sandwich. She didn't know my family. She didn't care about my last name. She simply saw a hungry child." His eyes returned to Sophie. "Everything I built, the discipline, the loyalty, the restraint, it all began that afternoon." He looked around the church. "You call me powerful. You call me successful. But long before I built an empire, she built the man standing before you." Many guests openly wept. Even several hardened capos wiped discreetly at their eyes. Nathan looked around desperately. No one supported him anymore. His carefully crafted image had collapsed. For years he had measured people by appearance. Lorenzo had measured them by character. And everyone in the church suddenly understood which standard truly mattered. Nathan quietly removed the wedding ring from his pocket. Without another word, he walked down the aisle alone. No one stopped him. No one called after him. His humiliation required no audience. Only silence. Sophie looked at Lorenzo for a long time. "So all these years, you remembered, every single day, and you never stopped protecting me." "No. But protection isn't love." He lowered his eyes. "Love shows up. I failed you. I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't deserve another chance. I only needed you to know. You were never forgotten." Tears streamed freely down Sophie's face. She reached for the friendship bracelet. Then, very gently, she tied it back around Lorenzo's wrist, exactly where she had placed it 25 years earlier. The church watched in complete silence. "I waited a long time," she whispered. Lorenzo nodded. "I know. You hurt me. I know. You were a coward." A faint, painful smile crossed his face. "I know." She took one slow step closer. "But you came." Lorenzo closed his eyes. "I'll spend the rest of my life making up for every day I lost." "You can't." He looked up. She smiled through tears. "But you can start today." Without another word, she wrapped her arms around him. The applause began with one elderly woman near the back, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire church erupted into thunderous applause, not because a mafia boss had interrupted a wedding, but because two children had finally kept a promise 25 years in the making. 6 months later, the grand opening of the DeLuca Children's Literacy Foundation became national news. Unlike the luxury casinos or skyscrapers bearing the DeLuca name, this building stood in one of the country's most underserved neighborhoods. Its shelves held thousands of books. Every child received free memberships. Reading programs operated every evening. Scholarships funded future teachers and librarians. When journalists congratulated Sophie for becoming the foundation's executive director, she smiled modestly. "I wasn't hired because I love Lorenzo. I was hired because I love books, And because every child deserves someone who believes in them, the board unanimously agreed. No one questioned her qualifications. She had earned every position herself. Later that afternoon, during the ribbon-cutting ceremony, a reporter asked Lorenzo the question everyone expected. "Mr. DeLuca, you built one of the most powerful empires in America. Who deserves the credit?" People assumed he would name loyal capos, his late father, business partners, political allies. Instead, Lorenzo searched the crowd until he found Sophie helping a little girl choose her first library card. He smiled. Empires are built with power. The cameras followed his gaze. But good men, he walked toward Sophie, are built by kind little girls who share their lunch. The crowd turned toward her. Thousands of people applauded, not because she had married the most powerful man in America, but because they finally understood who she had always been. Lorenzo gently took her hand. This time, he didn't hide her. He didn't protect her from a distance. He stood proudly beside her for the entire world to see. Sophie had never become worthy of love. She had always been worthy. The only thing that changed was that the man who loved her finally found the courage to arrive before it was too late.